Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to my podcast. I hope you've had a lovely week. Obviously you're listening on Monday actually. So I hope you've had a lovely weekend or whenever you're listening. Thank you. Thank you for choosing to tune in today. I might sound a little bit somber because I've been tackling, honestly, by the way, this is a small disclaimer. It might seem like I complain a lot about developing and coding. It's because I don't know what I'm doing. It just happens to be that I've built things, and it's only just recently that my husband was like, if somebody asks you, you are a developer, by the way. And it was one of those things that I struggled to accept because I really struggle to get to finish these things. Like whenever it's out, I'm like, oh, glory be to God, because I genuinely do not know how that happened. So even though I'm a developer, I don't know. A lot of the time I'm like reading a lot of documentation, watching loads of tutorials, just trying to figure it out. Like, guys, if you download the app that I've just recently launched called Rilla, just know that it was a lot of prayer, a lot of fasting to get me through it, because I genuinely have no clue how these things have been built. I think the last time I spoke to you, I told you that I also recently launched Power Pro, so for Christian businesses. That's on findyourpower.com. So yeah, it's been eventful. But right now, even though I've launched Rilla, I've been trying to get notifications to work. I had to launch it because I was like, I'm just going to launch it. But the thing is, notifications on an app is obviously very important. So the fact that it's not working, it's quite jarring. I'm not going to lie. It's very jarring. But I launched it without it, simply based on the fact that I just wanted to launch it. But I now need to get to the point where it's working, and it's really been bothering me. By the grace of God, by the time this episode is out, I would have figured it out. I'm going to give myself a month off because I feel like I've been just going with an array of things. So in that month, I'm most likely going to do loads of reading and loads of TV watching, maybe some sewing. I need to, perhaps sketch out a few ideas, maybe a bit of knitting. I say all of this, but the likelihood is I'm going to nap. I'm most likely going to nap, but we'll see, because it's a month and, I don't want to be bored. So the likelihood is I'll probably do some knitting, maybe make some Christmas gifts. So knit some jumpers or knit some stuff as Christmas gifts and all that stuff. And that's probably what I'm going to do. But this week, whilst I've been tackling this very jarring issue with my notifications, I've been listening to a couple audiobooks. You know what's really interesting as well? Sometimes I can get into my audiobooks and just be like, I've listened to like half the book now and I'm really not feeling it. Do I carry on or just let it go? And this week, oh my gosh, we had to just let it go. My husband and I were listening to this book and we're like, for somebody else, I'm sure that this would be right up their street, but it's not us at all. So I'm not going to really talk about I'm not going to name the book because, it was a bit problematic in my personal opinion. However, I really enjoyed reading a book called Leota. I say reading, but you know what I mean. Leota's Garden. Leota's Garden is basically about, I'm just going to give you a synopsis, right? Basically about an old lady who, her husband who came back from the war wasn't able to work, so she had to work, which back in the day, that was kind of like, frowned upon because she was a lady. Her children were none the wiser because her husband was pretending to go out to work and he'll be staying out in the park or drinking all day. She would work, she would give the money to her husband, and it would appear like it was her husband that was making the money, and she was saving all the money for herself and going out and drinking or whatever. But really, she wasn't drinking. She never had time to do that because she was a personal assistant, and she worked around the clock for her boss. And when she wasn't working, sorry guys, you're going to see my jacked up nail. It's another thing, guys. Usually I would make time to fix my nail, but I've been so exhausted trying to figure this stuff out, and I'm just like, because I do my own nails, so I'm like, it is what it is. But yeah, so when she's not working, she is in the garden. So her children are very resentful of this, and they grow up to be very bitter, resentful people, specifically her daughter. Her daughter grows up to be extremely resentful, extremely bitter, and has her own idea of what it is to be a mother. So she then grows up to be a very bitter lady, her daughter. Her daughter's name is Eleanor. So Leota's daughter, Eleanor, grows up to be quite a bitter lady, but very ambitious, because she's not going to work really, because, in her mind, a mother's supposed to be at home with her children. So she marries all these very successful men. So the first husband left her because she was bitter. Second husband left her because she was bitter. Third husband knew how to kind of control her. But they were all very successful, and she just stayed at home planning all her kids' lives, right? I say all her kids, she got 2. So basically she, mapped out every single one of their, the type of extracurricular activities that they were going to engage in, the instruments that they were going to engage in, the languages, and then what university that they were going to go to. And in her mind, that was what a good mother does. Not encourage them to pursue their own personal dreams and visions for themselves, but to follow a solid plan that was mapped out for them from the moment they were born. So basically, her and her children see her, Eleanor's children see how she is with her mother. They see how she's quite mean to her, and she's quite bitter, and she blames her mother for being a useless mother and a deadbeat mother. Basically says that, all she did was go to work and she never had time for her kids. But she didn't know the truth behind the story. So she spends her whole entire life angry at her mother. Her mother ends up, so she has children. So obviously Eleanor has children, and her daughter decides that she's going to, because her daughter decides to pursue art instead of the plan that her mother had for her. So she goes, "You're just like my mother, doing what you want and not caring about anybody else." So her daughter decides to go and discover her grandmother for herself, because they've been estranged from from her grandmother. She finds out that her grandmother is this lovely old lady, 85 years old. She's very old. The garden has gone to disarray. So one of the things that they do when they spend time together is she's rebuilding the garden and just learning more about Leota, her grandmother, and to find out, she found out the truth behind it, because her mother, Eleanor, never asked her mother what, was happening. And she found out that her grandmother wasn't necessarily a deadbeat. Her grandmother was working because the family needed money, basically, and, needed to survive. So she builds a really beautiful relationship with her grandmother, and she pursues art, and does really well with her art. Actually, her art sells and all that type of stuff. And her mother is kind of resentful. One of the things that really stood out to me in this book is that her daughter Annie decided that she was going to have Thanksgiving and Christmas with her grandmother Leota, and obviously they're estranged. So Eleanor doesn't really want to do that. So because nobody else is going to be with her, everybody else has decided that they're also going to go to Leota's house. And Annie is cooking. Annie cooks, and Eleanor's of this belief that Annie can't cook. So she was like, I don't know why you're going, blah, blah, blah. Annie can't cook. And Annie ends up throwing this amazing dinner. The turkey's moist and flavorful, and all of the food, everything's lovely. So her mother then offers to clean. And she throws away all the leftovers, which everybody knows is the most blasphemous thing you can ever do when it comes to, any type of Christmas dinner or anything like that. The leftovers can last most of the time for at least a week. Depending on what type of family you have, you might cook loads and you might end up having 2 weeks worth of food. You definitely do not throw it away. So you can make sandwiches. You can use the turkey for fried rice. Anyways, so when Annie goes to the kitchen to discover that all the food has been chucked in the bin, she's fuming, and rightly so. So she comes out and she's really angry with her mother, and her mother's very smug because really her mother's jealous of the fact that her daughter was able to throw this amazing meal. So anyways, her mother, Leota, end up so in a nutshell, so basically Annie ends up telling her mother the truth. Then Eleanor ends up feeling like an idiot because she's been angry at her mother all these years. And not only that, they've just been waiting for their mother to die. And when I mean they, I'm talking about Eleanor and her brother, Ben. I don't know, I can't remember his name. So they've just been waiting for their mother to die so that they can sell the house. And Ben's in quite a lot of debt. I'm using Ben as a placeholder because I can't remember his name. He's in quite a lot of debt, so he just wants the house so that they can sell the house and clear his debt. But what ends up happening is Leota ends up giving the house to Annie, but ends up giving a substantial amount of stock to Eleanor and her son. So Coca-Cola stock and all this type of stuff, which we all know is a lot of stock. And her mother had bought those stock years ago. So it's worth quite a lot of money, and it was enough for it to clear the debt. And they didn't care what happened to the mother. They were just like, we should, cremate her and just put her in a cardboard box and sprinkle her somewhere, whatever. They didn't care until they saw the will and was like, kind of thing. Anyways, really sad, but the book really depicts bitterness and unforgiveness really well, and how the bitterness kind of seeped into her personality and just corrupted her being as a person, just made her this unbearable person. And I was thinking about all my encounters with certain individuals, and I was also thinking about how I was prior to my deliverance when I went to Budapest. If you want to know about that, go listen to another episode. So maybe my first one, but yeah. So I was thinking about how important character is, and how soft your heart is, and it just made me grateful that God has delivered me, because you can literally just walk around angry at everything, angry at life, and blame everyone for your misgivings or for for the mistakes that you've made. You blame everyone because it's not your fault, it's their fault, and it's because they didn't do this, or it's because that didn't happen, it's because this didn't happen. And like realistically, life is life, it is what it is. And sometimes some really, really bad things happen. And sometimes some things happen that are quite minor, and you perhaps look at it in quite a large, big way because you're angry. You might interpret things in a different way because you're angry and bitter. And I was thinking about the time when I cooked some ayamashe, which is like a Nigerian dish made out of peppers and stuff like that. But I made like a seafood ayamashe. So it was kind of like, the base is palm oil, and then you use peppers, onions, and you season it accordingly. But I use seafood instead of meat, which is what usually is a kind of like a salted meat combination. You tend to put different types of meats together to kind of add to this this ayamashe stew. So one time I cooked this meal and my mother came to visit, and it was honestly a very exquisite dish. I do say so myself. It was really nice. And my mum, she was very vocal about how amazing the dish was. Oh my gosh, who made this? This is amazing. Oh my gosh, this should be in a restaurant. Who made this? And my husband was like, because where was I? I was in the kitchen, I think. My husband was like, oh, Blessing made it. No, my Blessing. And the thing is that at the time, because I was so bitter, I interpreted it as my mum, again, doubting my abilities. Whereas my mum was in awe of my abilities. She was in awe of it. And that's what God revealed to me whilst I was in the steam room. He really showed me that moment. And I was so angry about that after that day. Like, I was probably fuming for a few weeks. Oh, every time I would cook and something nice, and like, the boys will enjoy the meal, whatever, I'll be like, of course it's lovely. And this is the thing, like, when you're walking around with bitterness and anger, it kind of makes you a bit conceited as well, because you overthink everything. So for a few weeks, I'll cook something and it would obviously taste great. I say obviously because I love cooking. My husband and I we really enjoy cooking, and that's something that we do. And we do love to do it. And most people have actually suggested that we open up a restaurant, which we will not do. But because that would then make cooking not fun. But it's something that we love doing, maybe for smaller groups of people, just to see their faces when they eat our food. Do you know what I mean? We like to cook just to see people's faces, really. Just be like, yes, I love that you're enjoying this. I love that. We thank God. So, so basically I'd cook and my boys will eat it and they'll just be like, really just, and I'll be like, I can't cook now, kind of thing. And I was doing that for like a few weeks. I remember doing that for a few weeks, and every time I would cook, which was quite often, I would get triggered again based on the fact that I thought that my mother was somehow doubting my abilities instead of the reality of the matter, which was her being in awe of the abilities. So, because my mom, she's not really much of a cook. So it's not like she taught me how to cook. It was really the grace of God that I could cook. God taught me how to cook. So that's probably one of the main reasons why she's shocked that I can cook, because it's God that taught me how to cook. But yeah, so I was really triggered and I was walking around angry for ages because of that. And I found myself getting angrier and angrier. And I just know that I wouldn't have been a nice person to be around during that time at all, because I was so angry and so bitter. And I was just listening to this book and it felt like I was thinking it was kind of like I was listening to it and I was thinking, I wonder if that's how I was. And I'm just so grateful for God delivering me and God saving me. And I know that I'm completely different to the way I was back then. You know, the way that I experience life is different. It's definitely different. It's like night and day. Like the way that I see people before, I feel like I'm the type of person, I was the type of person that would kind of assume that somebody was wicked and bad before they proved that they were good, instead of expecting people to be good until they prove you otherwise. And I feel like that's how I am now. I just expect people to be good until they prove me otherwise. And I feel like that's just a nicer way to experience life. Like I've experienced some amazing things recently. Yesterday, my kids, at my kids' school, the receptionist gave me a plant. I don't know why, but that just made me so happy. I was like, oh my gosh. And obviously I love plants. You should see, obviously, you know, behind there's behind me, I mean, a whole lot of plants. I was looking at one of her plants. She had a spider plant and there was loads of babies coming off the plant. And I was like, oh my gosh, your spider plant is thriving. Look how beautiful it is. And I wasn't basically saying, give me a cutting, but she was like, oh, would you like one? I've already got some in water. I was like, really? And then she brought out like a thriving cutting. And I as soon as I got home, I put it in the pot, soil and everything. And I was like, oh. And I was just so happy all day. And the thing is that I know that prior to my deliverance, I would have been mean muggy and I would have been just walking around with an angry face. I wouldn't have been as talky, as like talkative. I wouldn't have been as receptive to like, you know, the relationship that myself and this receptionist has, you know, she's not the receptionist. She's, you know, the PA of the principal, but she's just a fabulous human being, and we've built such a great rapport, and I just love it. And normally I wouldn't have allowed myself to build such a relationship because I know I was quite standoffish because I just didn't trust people. I don't trust people, and it's not for any particular reason other than the fact that I just felt like I just expected people to hurt me. And glory be to God that I've been delivered and I get to experience the world in a nicer way. And yeah, there are bad people out there, but we shouldn't assume that every single person is bad. One of the things that I'm grateful for is that God has blessed my family and I to be in a nice neighborhood. The kids go to a nice school. I have nothing to complain about. Things are good. Life is good. And it's not like I'm in a dangerous place. And there are people in the world that are in quite dangerous environments, and you have to be on guard when you're in those type of environments. But even in those environments, there are still the outliers. There are still people that are nice. Like I was watching a video, such a random video. I was definitely procrastinating because of the notification issue. And I just stumbled across this video where these guys were knocking on doors in Compton, and everybody warned them against it. They were like, you guys, 2 white guys in Compton, don't do it. This is literally what they were saying in the video. And they were knocking on doors because they wanted to offer to cook for a family in Compton. I haven't watched any of their other videos. I don't know what the point of the video was, to be honest. Like, I'm not sure if that's the thing that they do on their videos. Because I literally only watched that video until I went back to work. You know, it was like, let me watch this 22-minute video to procrastinate. And then I'll go back to work trying to figure out how to do this. So watch the video. And, you know, most people were like, no. They actually end up going to a church first. They went to church and thinking, oh, we'll probably have better luck going to church. And they spent, they went and they had, went to the service. They had a great time. And it seemed like everybody, went to church and quickly went out, so they missed their opportunity to potentially grab somebody, for them to ask to cook for them. So they had to knock on doors. And loads of people said no. They're like, why? And all that type of stuff. Because respectfully, if somebody knocks on my door and offers to come and cook, even in my nice neighborhood, is a resounding no. Because let me tell you why. Firstly, I don't know you. I don't really like people coming into my house, because the whole point was for them to cook in your house. So they were going to come inside of your house and cook. I'm very particular about the type of people I bring into my house. I don't just bring anyone into my home. There's quite a big, it's a big process before I'm like, yeah, come to my house kind of thing. And now, that I've been delivered, and my sons recently asked if they can have play dates in the house. So as you heard, you saw that side. And you heard that side for the ones that are just listening. It's something that I need to eventually get comfortable with, like the type of the people that we tend to have around for play dates are the people that we know. So the kids, the friends, our friends' kids kind of thing. But our boys, they've obviously made their own friends, and they want to have play dates, and they expect that their friends should be able to come to our house and vice versa. We don't mind going to your house. We can come to your house. But usually bringing people to our house, a little bit funny about it. I'm going to keep praying for God to, make me a bit more open about that. But the idea of somebody knocking on my door and then offering to cook, they didn't say anything else. They said, oh, we'll cook. And then most people were like, no. The family that eventually said yes, they were like, are you guys like professional gourmet cooks? Which is a valid question. And the reason why it's a valid question is because I want to know if you have a basic understanding of food hygiene and things like that. I had food hygiene training because there was a point when I actually worked with the Prince's Trust. And my husband knows food hygiene because his mother was a caterer. So we both are very much aware of food hygiene, okay? My husband's family at some point had a restaurant, okay? We understand food hygiene. I'm very, if I was to go to like a restaurant or whatever, I like to look at their food hygiene ratings. I'm not gonna lie. I like to look at these things, stuff like that. So, when they were like, oh, we want to cook, and they were like, oh, okay, so what's your, are you gourmet cooks? They're like, no. But this family, incredibly trusting, were like, yeah, sure. But then they ended up contacting, the family ended up contacting the guys to say, oh, yeah, you're cooking for 10 people, there's a lot of people in this house. So they were stressed, okay? 10 people? We thought it would be like 4. So they started calling around to ask anybody who wants to help them. This, by the way, they were not trying to get an expert cook to cook. They were just looking for anybody to come and help with the cooking. They ended up getting the White House chef. This guy, bodybuilder. He's an ex-army vet. That's correct, right? Yeah. An American, proper hench, dark-skinned, guy. And then the family, initially, it's actually funny because it's like, they were like really nonchalant when these guys came in. But then as soon as the White House chef came, who's a black guy, comes in, now the kids were like hovering around the kitchen because obviously representation matters, and they're in Compton. And I'm assuming that they see a lot of bad things happening in Compton. I'm assuming, I don't know. So it was nice to see somebody. They were like, this guy who's a chef, he said that he cooked for 4 presidents. He's like this star. He's amazing. He's got big arms, So like the aunt, the lady in there, she's like been she's just drooling because she's like, is this a chef or is this a stripper? You know, she was really like drooling over the chef, and the kids were just in awe because he was able to cut really quickly and he's just cooking all these amazing dishes. And by the way, this chef came and he did it selflessly. And what I mean by that is he didn't charge. He offered to help these guys just out of the kindness of his heart. And he had just come, you know, I think he had been traveling for 19 hours, jumps in his car, drives an hour to cook for this family. And it was just so beautiful to see. It was beautiful to see like that type of like selflessness. And he just cooked this dish and all of them were just in awe. And it was lovely to see how the family just looked at this chef, this White House chef. They call him the White House chef because he had cooked for 4 presidents. And they thought, wow, like this guy legit cooked for 4 presidents, you know. And it's just representation in a positive way. And I don't know where I was going with this, but it was just lovely. And it was a good way to procrastinate. I'm not going to lie. Because I watched it and I was like, you know, usually you'd be kind of like, you know, in certain areas like Compton, you know, you have to be standoffish. But in that situation, they allowed themselves to assume that these people were good. And in that whole moment, they ended up having a great experience having a meal cooked by the White House chef. So having such an open heart allowed them to be blessed in such a beautiful way. They were just expecting the 2 guys that knocked on the door to cook for them. But God made it that they experienced a meal good enough for a president, right? Just because their hearts were open, just because they were willing to kind of just expect good instead of expect bad. So yeah, like I just found that beautiful, and I was just thinking that's like watching that was quite deep for me, because I was like, I think I see things in a different way these days anyways. Like I always see like, what's the message that this is giving me? What's the message? And it was the message that I saw that I received watching that was that sometimes just having an open heart can allow you to experience something that's so great, so beautiful, just having a soft, open heart. And they were in Compton and they could have been standoffish for obvious reasons, but they were like, yeah, come cook for us, come to our house, yeah. And then next minute the White House chef comes and he's the one that's cooking for them, not the 2 guys that knocked on the door. And they just got this beautiful experience and they were eating the food and they were just like, this is really good, you know. So yeah. So I feel like my takeaway from this week has been keeping my heart soft, always being mindful that I'm not going backwards when it comes to unforgiveness, when it comes to bitterness and resentment, and just making sure that I keep my heart soft and ready for God to move, because God is always willing to move. But if you've hardened your heart, then you might block what God has in store for you. So that's my takeaway from this week. And I really pray by the grace of God that when I look back at this episode, I will still have the heart that I have right now, in the sense of it being softer, in the sense of it being being in a forgiving nature, in the sense of it being in a loving nature, and just expecting good to happen and expecting people to be good. And yeah, I pray that God guards me and you from things that can harden our hearts, experiences that can harden your heart. I pray that He guards you and protects you and heals your heart if your heart is still hard. So I pray that you experience the softness and know that God is softening your heart, because He will renew your mind and every part of you. So I pray that you experience that softness, and I pray that you experience life in a lovely way and meet beautiful people and have beautiful experiences. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Guys, Thank you for listening to me waffle. And yeah, by the grace of God, I would have finished the notifications by the next episode. So keep praying for me, guys. And I will keep praying for you. I hope you have a lovely week, lovely weekend, or whatever. Bye. Is a plant in the shop?